Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 66 of Days Gone By, this time featuring a car from Gran Turismo 6 in particular, and this is actually a vehicle which has been requested for me to review a couple of times, and that was kind of surprising to me at least, because it's not a car that I hear people talking about that much. Now maybe it's just a cult following kind of deal, like a Ep.66 but less popular. But either way, it's a car that certainly deserves to be featured. Now, as far as the cars in this series go, it's not that old. It is one of the newer classics. So what do you get when you buy one of these vehicles? Because this car kind of intersects two very popular models together, the Celica and the Supra, and it comes from an era where cars were all very boxy, of course, pop-up headlights were the in thing. And it's also a reasonably large vehicle, especially by Japanese standards. The engine as well is quite large, not necessarily nowadays, but certainly back then, a 2.8 litre, it's naturally aspirated, and to be honest, I think that's probably the biggest drawback of this car. Don't get me wrong, I love naturally aspirated engines, most of my favourite cars have naturally aspirated engines, but in some cases, especially on certain racing games like GT6, there are definitely some vehicles, like this one, the BMW M3, and a couple of others as well, very notable ones, that need to have turbo or supercharging as an option to really unlock so much more of the potential that they have. And when I say potential, I don't just mean power and torque. Those are the obvious benefits. I mean potential from a competition point of view. Because having that turbo or that supercharger helps the car out so much in boosting its competitive range, because you can have a great handling car, but if it's not quick enough in a straight line to ever compete on any track, then it's kind of a pointless gesture. Now of course you could say the same thing about a car which is quick in a straight line but not around corners. So what does this vehicle offer? Because it doesn't have the turbo or supercharger option, but it does have a reasonably big engine to begin with. Well, to some degree that does kind of save it, because that 2.8 litre engine can be tuned up to 326 horsepower and 286 pound-feet of torque. That's not bad. That's not bad at all for a naturally aspirated classic engine, and perhaps most surprisingly of all, for a car of its size, it's not heavy. Not at all. It weighs just over 1,000 kilos with the full weight loss package, and that is very impressive. Perhaps even more impressive than the power from that naturally aspirated engine. Now the horsepower per tonne is 315, mainly thanks to the fact that the weight is nice and low, which is kind of unusual for a car of its size and type, and the PP level is actually remarkably reasonable. It's under 480, which, if you think about it, is very low for a car with that much power and relatively low weight. Now of course you can find lighter vehicles at that level. Something like a DC2 Integra, for instance, is going to be around 130 kilos lighter than that, but a DC2 Integra isn't going to have 326 horsepower. So it's pros and cons all over the place, ebbs and flows, and this car has a nice balance of both power and weight. It's not overly heavy, but it's not underpowered either. It's got that nice middle ground, if you will, between the two. And then when you add on top of that the fact that it has that classic Japanese value for money at only 23,000 credits, and you've got yourself potentially a pretty good sleeper car, and you start to see why this would be a vehicle that does get requested. And I can certainly see why. Now, I haven't driven this car that much. I don't believe, if memory serves, I've ever raced it on any Gran Turismo game. I've owned it on a number of them but never really used it, but it is definitely a car which, for Toyota fans, for Celica fans, for Supra fans as well, possibly even more so for Supra fans than Celica fans really, it is a car which has its uses, and it's a sleeper car which isn't talked about as much as some others like the Daihatsu Storias and the Lexus GSs, those kind of almost obvious sleeper cars that become known at a certain point that they are good, whereas this one is kind of still under the radar. So what can it do around the track? Well, in a straight line it's pretty good. The top speed is over 200 miles per hour, which again, it's pretty good for a naturally aspirated car at well under 500 pp. That means that in most situations it's got the kind of top end performance that you need. Acceleration as well is pretty good. Not necessarily remarkable but certainly good enough to win straight line biased events. But in particular, in a similar way to how surprisingly low the weight is, I would have to say the most impressive aspect of this car's performance is in terms of its cornering ability. And not just handling, but cornering speed as well. The speed that you can take corners at almost doesn't look right in a vehicle this big. It looks like it shouldn't be able to maneuver as well as it actually can. And again, that is a trait of a sleeper car. It's a vehicle which doesn't necessarily look that impressive, but then when you actually see it in movement, if you will, on a track, it's surprisingly elegant sometimes how efficient their performance can be. And this certainly has the potential to be exactly that kind of car. Being rear-wheel drive as well, it's got that drift ability and also the driver feedback that you would want to have fun, not just to get the job done. It could have easily been a front-wheel drive car, and it wouldn't necessarily have been bad if it were. It would have been even lighter. But as a rear-wheel drive car, it suits the car perfectly, it's fun to drive, and although I don't use it that much, as I said, and to be honest I don't plan to use it that much either, for the right person, it definitely has a lot of potential there, especially of course for lower PP racing, under 480 in particular, because that's as high as you can go. So if that sounds like the kind of car that can appeal to you, a sleeper car, in particular a Japanese one, then you should definitely check this model out. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.